Well, hey there, friends. It's been a hot minute since I've made a video this way, a face video, which I'm realizing there's a reason why I don't do these more often because they're a pain in the neck. If you're familiar with me, the old chaos is back. Things have moved around in the office, and you know, things are what they are. So, like, maybe ordered chaos. There actually is some order back there, believe it or not, but it's still me. So anyway, I want to start a new series that I've had on my mind for a minute, and I need to remember where to look, which is there, not there. Um, I want to talk about the suits. I want to talk about the elements. So this is kind of the first video in this four-part series, which is the suits on Earth, the elements on Earth, kind of tangential to the majors on Earth, which I did. Was it last year? I think it was last year. So we're gonna start with fire, and being a Leo, that seems like the most appropriate thing to do. Also, if you see this shirt popping up, it's Bela Lugosi. I thought it would be a good idea to wear this, and now there's just Dracula peeping on my titties. Anyway, it's always a ride around here. And we're back. If not with clean glasses, we have cleaner glasses now, and I am less distracted. Am I? Probably not. Anyway, fire on Earth. So, why is fire codependent? Well, I talked about this on Instagram, which is kind of the thing that was brewing in my mind when I decided to make this little series. And I think I'll do one for each suit, and then maybe eventually I'll do one on the four quarts, but here's where we are right now. So, why is fire codependent? Well, it needs oxygen, it needs air to survive. It literally cannot survive without it. You could make the argument, of course, if you wanted to, if you felt, super committed to it, that water requires air as well, and so in that way it's codependent. But in fact, I don't know, it just feels different to me because water is made up of air. Fire isn't made of air. It needs air to sustain it. In order for fire to survive, it needs air. It needs oxygen to feed it. So water is sort of not the same thing, but they do have complementary qualities. I sometimes argue, although maybe not all that well, that fire and water actually are the most powerful and in some ways the most destructive elements, because they really do have sort of a fundamentally destructive nature if they are let unbalanced. And that's kind of the whole thing about working with the elements in tarot, is that you're sort of playing with the powers and strengths of the elements, sort of which ones are more powerful, which ones are less powerful, which ones are sort of most active in a reading, and what does that mean? And that's kind of how I work with the elements. Less so now with the dignities, which I used to do a lot. Now it's a little bit more about the interplay between the elements. And so if you have a fire reading, a reading with a lot of fire in it, and no swords cards, no air cards, then you can probably take that as a signal that whatever's happening is going to be over relatively quickly. Because unless some oxygen starts to come in to fuel that, then it's going to burn out. And so if you have a relationship reading, for example, and there's lots of fire and there's no air, then whatever that relationship is going to burn out relatively quickly, unless something comes in to stabilize it. So could be a one-night stand, could be just some really sexy fun. That's great. Like, not all relationships need to be sustained. So depending on the context, then that may be totally what you want, totally what you're after, totally what's necessary in this case. But if it's a reading about a long-term situation and it's all fire and no air, then you're going to have a situation where the oxygen's going to get eaten up really quickly. It's not sustainable. Something's either got to open up the window and let air in, or you're going to have a problem. Now, if you have a relationship reading and it's all water and a little bit of fire, it's all emotion and just a little bit of passion, then what you're going to end up with is a situation where all of that feeling actually puts out the fire. And so again, it's not a sustainable situation. And so fire really is a codependent element. And I know that I'm sort of stealing that word from psychology, and some folks may find that problematic. Yeah, I guess it is. But we have to reconcile with the fact that these words get thrown around all the time. And frankly, in tarot, it actually makes sense. But the interplay, the relationships between the elements matter. It's going to tell us a whole lot about the situation, about the reading. So again, lots of water, no fire, or a little bit of fire. The relationship may sustain, but the passion won't. So that's a thing to keep in mind, too. If you are perfectly fine with an emotional, sensational relationship, and by sensation, I mean senses, great. You know what I mean? That's perfect. If you're hoping for some sexy time, then something needs to be done to balance out the water. And that's an interesting thing. We'll talk about this in the water video too. The relationship between fire and water is so specific, is so different, is so unique, because they can harm each other. So too much fire can boil away all the water, and you're left with a burnt pot. Too much water can put out all the fire, and you're left with just a soggy mess. But when they work in consort, when they work together, when they're balanced, they create steam, and that's what makes engines run. And so, if you're looking for a relationship reading and you want kind of the right balance of sex and feeling, of passion and sensation, you're going to want a balance of those two elements for sure. And if you see a reading where that situation, where those elements are fairly balanced, I think that's a good sign. You know what I mean? You need to keep stoking the fire, you need to keep replenishing the pot with water, but that kind of balance is a really good sign. So again, in the context of a relationship reading, the way that fire balances with the other elements is going to be really important. And I think particularly with fire, having the other elements in there really matters. You need the earth to sort of fuel the fire, you need the oxygen to fuel the fire, and you need the water to sort of balance it all. So fire really is a dependent element, if we don't want to use the language of psychology, of codependence, of relationships, because it really does require the other elements to both sustain and balance it and keep it from getting haywire. That's the other thing that happens with fire, is whether or not there's a lot of oxygen. If there's a lot of fuel, earth, and there's no water or very little water, then things are going to burn up really fast. Now, we talk a lot about timing and hoping to do timing readings. If you are looking at a situation where you have a lot of fire and not a lot of elements to counter that, it's going to go fast. You're going to find something that's really, really just wow. You're going to find that it just wipes out really quick. So from a timing perspective, I would say, if it's all fire and nothing to balance it, probably a matter of days, if not sooner. So there's that kind of element. Now, if you add some water into the equation, it's going to slow it down. That's going to balance things out. And so maybe we go, depending on the amount of water when compared to the amount of fire, maybe we stretch into weeks or months. But wherever there's a lot of fire, you can expect something fast to happen, because it flares up and it burns up, it uses up all its fuel, and then it's left to ash. So fire in that way, again, really dependent on the suits around it, maybe more than any of the other suits. The other thing we want to do with all of the elements, but we're talking about fire today, is to consider its function, its behavior, and its use in life. So what does fire do? Fire forges, if we think about air and metal and swords, right? So it can strengthen, it can stiffen something, so it can forge. It can cleanse. I mean, fire is used in a lot of traditions to cleanse in various ways. And again, partnered with air, that kind of cleansing can be very spiritual cleansing, right? Because you think of incense. So we create sort of a pairing there that's very complementary of cleansing or spiritual awakening, or that kind of thing is in balance, fire and air, because there's, again, that sort of cleansing, spiritual, incensey sort of quality to it. Fire destroys, and it can wipe out a lot. And you can think about that both literally, you know what I mean? Like if you are in a fire-prone part of the country and you're getting a lot of readings with a lot of fire, maybe that's a warning. But if you're reading about other things like work, then is someone's ego or their self-interest getting in the way? Are we getting too much of a good thing in that case? Are tempers flaring too much? So you think about the way that fire flares and the way it destroys. But then there's a whole other part of fire as a destroying element too, because there's a lot of traditions in which fire is necessary, and so are things like forest fires, right? There's a controlled burn. There's a natural cycle of fire and ash that fertilizes the earth, and that, in indigenous cultures, for example, in some indigenous cultures, there are people whose job it is to be the fire keepers, the fire tenders, and they sort of work with the elements. They work with a forest fire to make sure that it's doing what forest fires are supposed to do for the land, for the earth around it. And had, far more success, communities with that legacy, that connection to fire, than we do now in our hyper industrialized, government sort of EPA way of handling forest fires. And then that gets into a very complicated thing about like, is something standing in the right place? If you have a reading, let's say you have like let's say you're fostering your sort of empress qualities, right? So you're doing like a reading, and the empress is your significator, or maybe like path working, and your empress card is surrounded by fire. Is the empress in the right place, or are they in a place where things are going to burn up around them? What, on the other hand, if they're surrounded by the other elements in balance, maybe that's a sign of a good placement, right? Are we focusing our energy in the right area, for example? This isn't to say that fire is all bad, but the thing is that with modern tarot, so much has focused on kind of self-empowerment and the positive aspects and the good parts, the empowering parts, that we forget that there's another side of the coin. There's a shadow, for lack of a better term, side of that equation that is not fun. Maybe it's good, maybe it's necessary, maybe it's the right thing, but it's not fun. And fire has that quality to it too. It's not always fun. It's hot. Sometimes hot is good, sometimes it's hot and sexy, sometimes it's hot in a bad way and it's like too much and we're getting sweaty, and it's like being under the spotlight, it's like being under the lamp in the interrogation room or whatever. Especially with the sun card. The sun is kind of the quintessential spotlight in a way. And so if you have the sun card surrounded by a lot of fire, that's like too hot to handle. Maybe it's too much. So it's important to think about the function of fire. And then there are other functions too, right? We use it for heating. We use it for warmth. We use it for connection. So those are like home qualities, hearth qualities, right? And so if we think about the coin suit or the pentacle suit, those can be a little metallic, a little cold, unless we bring fire into it and warm things up. And so if you have a very earthy reading, a very pentacly or coiny reading, that can signify the home front. But if it's a lot of air and water, it's very cold house. On the other hand, if you've got a very pentacly or coiny reading and there's some fire there, it's warming things up. So how do the elements dance with each other? They really do. And the way that they're functioning in a reading is going to depend a lot on the context, on the specific cards, on the numbers, on the subject, all of those things. But you definitely can see the way that fire has multiple personalities, I guess, multiple behaviors, multiple functions. It contains multitudes, I guess is the right way to say it. And it's thinking about how is fire functioning in this context, in this reading. Why am I seeing so much fire? Or why am I seeing no fire? Again, the absence of an element tells you a lot, maybe as much as, in some cases, more than the elements that do show up. And so you have a reading with no fire, maybe there's something wrong there. Maybe we need a little passion, a little excitement, a little energy, a little exercise, a little electricity. And think about fire beyond the literal. What is made of fire? Electricity is fire, lightning is fire. These things maybe not recognizable, but they are certainly adjacent to. And so if you're reading about electricity, whether you mean that literally or spiritually or emotionally, your fire suit is going to explore that too. So what's the context of the reading? What are we talking about? And then under those conditions, how is fire likely to behave? Do we want a lot of fire in the workplace? No, not really. We want enough. We want energy. We want to make things sustainable, but we don't want to burn out. We don't want to get too tired. We don't want tempers flaring. We don't want egos flaring. We need balance. And if you're doing a reading and you see there's too much of an element, too much fire, for example, one thing that you can play with is the idea of saying, okay, let me take out the fire cards that are going to cause problems. Let me go through the deck and select other element cards to counter those, to countenance those, to balance those, and then make that your action plan. So the fire reading can tell you, okay, there's a problem here, but then you can take those cards out and replace them with other cards and say, here's how I balance that element now. So that's something really helpful to consider. So what is fire for? What does it do? How does it behave? The good and the bad. As you're learning the elements, as you're exploring the elements, asking yourself those questions are really, really critical. And they're going to serve you really well if the elements matter to you. And the elements matter in so many divination systems, aside from tarot. Of course, astrology, fire is a huge part of. but different kinds of magic as well. You know, you can use fire for its positive qualities, but maybe you need to use it for its negative qualities too. You know, maybe you need a tower moment. Maybe you need to burn something down. Maybe a system needs to be changed, and fire may be kind of the cleansing action that you need to do that. So it's just a really nuanced, really beautiful kind of concept that's more than just, yay, it's energy, yay, it's passion. Yeah, it's both of those things. But it's more, it's a lot more. It has a lot of personality, it has a lot of nuance. So the other part of this equation is exploring the icon or the element, the object, in this case wands. And wands are traditionally shown in tarot as branches, which does connect them to the earth. So there's kind of a simpatico there between the coins and the earth. And actually, if you think about it, the earth suit has an object that isn't quite as earthy. It's metal, which comes from the earth, but it's also forged. It's a coin or a pentacle. It's manipulated. So it's not in its natural state. It's not ore. It's refined. So you could think about earth or pentacles as refined earth, and then complemented with wands, then sort of an unrefined earth, right? A natural earth, earth in its natural state. So when those two elements play together, that's kind of a quality that you'll get. But again, wands, I think, are associated with fire for the obvious reason that they're wood and wood burns. But what are wands? You know what I mean? You can think about wands in terms of a magical point of view. So certainly they direct intention. They have qualities of magic. They have sort of symbolic qualities. So the suit of fire can sort of, or the suit of wands can speak of symbolism. It can speak of religion, magic, faith, those kinds of qualities, and the ability to sort of direct energy. And you get that very strongly, of course, in the Waite-Smith 8 of Wands, right? That sort of very direct path toward something. That's a very directed energy. But wands are only wands once Waite gets, or the Golden Dawn gets their hands on them. Before that, they were batons or sticks. And those are weapons. And they're very ugly, very unrefined, very common weapons. There's a long tradition in card playing and divination and tarot of the suits being associated with the classes or with the strata of society. And wands would traditionally be associated with the working class, with farmers, with people who are in the earth, of the earth, who work with the earth, but also poorer folks, the folks who can't afford a sword, right? We'll talk about this when we get to air, but obviously a sword is a very expensive weapon. It's a weapon still, but it's a weapon that reflects status. A wand or a baton or a stick or a club does not reflect status. Well, it does. It reflects low status. They're clumsy, they're unwieldy, and the only way to work with them is to bludgeon. You know, and so the quality of that as a weapon is very specific and very useful in readings too. You know, are you being bludgeoned by something? Are you being hit over the head by something? You know, and that doesn't need to be a bad thing. Is there a sign that you have been ignoring and the wands are like, hey, hi, you know, you've been missing this, like, pay attention. You know, so maybe the wands are trying to sort of bludgeon you over the head with information that you've been ignoring. But they're very confrontational. They're not soft. They're not cuddly. They're not friendly in every case either. So we do get the warmth of fire in some cases, especially with some earthy qualities. But if there are colder qualities with with swords and cups, maybe it's colder, forged, wet, metallic, right? And so they become bludgeon. They become weapons. They become clumsy. They're awkward to use. And so it can reflect a certain amount of awkwardness, clumsiness, right? So if you, like me, are a big klutz, then there's a quality in wands that is clumsy, you know, and sometimes clumsiness is endearing, and sometimes it's learned, and sometimes it's a crutch, you know, because everything is more than one thing. And so again, in a reading, you're going to find much more context as you explore, as you experiment. But thinking about the object as well as the element goes a long way. And then, you know, finally, you know, branches grow, they extend, they reach. And if you think about that in terms of a reading, for, you know, reaching for goals, extending a hand, you know, like if you're having problems with someone, or conflict with someone, the fire may indicate sort of flared tempers, but it might also, the branches of the wands may be like, reach out, you know what I mean? Extend yourself, try something new. Do you know what I mean? Like, they grow, so they're not static. Where, you know, a sword, air isn't static, but a sword kind of is. A coin kind of is. Once it's made, it's made. The only thing that can really happen to it is that it rusts and dissolves. Swords grow, you know, they will expand. And so they're an expansive suit in that way. And contrary to the fire aspect of it, they're also much slower. And so there's a little interesting tension there, which I think is fun as a reader. Like, how am I dealing with speed here? Well, am I getting a feeling of the wands as fire strongly? Or am I getting a feeling of the wands as branches? Depending on the context, right? And that will tell you the speed. So if we're getting fire, heat as a strong feeling from the reading, that aspect of the wands, it's probably fast. On the other hand, if we're getting branchiness, extensibility, extension, reaching out, it's probably slower. So things need to go that way. And again, dependent on water and earth. So if things want to grow and expand, they need water and earth to do that, and air. So again, fire, it's really dependent on the other elements, probably more than the other ones independently. Fire needs those things to survive. So again, there's so many places we could go with this, so many plots of land we could dig into. That's a weird metaphor. But the point is to invite you to think more creatively, more fundamentally, more differently about the suits rather than just what we read in books. What are they? What is their function? What is the element? What does the element do? What is the object? What does the object do? What is it for? And you don't need all of these all the time. Again, the context will guide you. But what's magical, what's exciting, what's fun as a reader is playing with the elements beyond the kind of stereotypical lovely qualities of them. They all have lovely qualities. They're all great, but they all have downsides. They all have shadow. They all have struggles. They all have opportunities. They all have conflict. And the way that they dance with each other is really fascinating and really telling. And to me, kind of a lot more interesting and a lot more nuanced, and as a result, more useful than just the dignities that I made a video about, in 2012. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're looking forward to the next 3 elements. It's, as much as it's sort of a weird situation as it is to make face videos for me, it is nice to do. Although editing them means I have to look at myself for a long time, and I'm very vain. And that makes it very complicated. So anyway, Fire on Earth, Wands on Earth. We'll take a look at the next 3 suits over the next couple weeks. I'm going to try to do these once a week, but it might just be as I have time, because life being life is life. So there you go. Be good. Take care, and we'll talk soon.